Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donohue. He is Sean Fitz, and we are both currently down in Florida, enjoying some sunshine, some football. Sean currently over in Orlando at the All-America event that Under Armour puts on, seeing some future Penn State Nittany Lions in action. He'll be making the trip on Thursday to Tampa, where I have been since Tuesday, and we've got a lot to catch up on, Sean.
We do. We've got recruiting, we've got football, we've got players that I don't even know where we're at with the countdown for opting out, but we've got a few to talk about. I'm sure Penn State missing at least 7 starters if you include Rasheed Walker in that mix, who came to Tampa on crutches. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about right now.
Yeah, 6 opt-outs plus no Rasheed Walker for this matchup. He is with the program, so read into that what you will. Traveled down to Tampa, hasn't moved on at this point, so still looking like he may be with this program next year, something we didn't really foresee going into the 2021 season, but down a lot of guys, and Jahan Dotson made it official earlier this week. We projected that. We projected Jaquan Brisker hitting the exit door as well. He won't be playing this time around. Derek Tangelo is one to me that I wasn't necessarily anticipating from a mile away, I guess, but you're down Tangelo and Ebiketie, the 2 transfer additions on the defensive front. You're down 2 starting linebackers in Ellis Brooks and Brandon Smith, who led this team in tackles. Number 1, Brooks. Number 2, Smith. Jaquan Brisker, who received All-American accolades at safety, no longer part of the equation. And, oh, by the way, your top offensive playmaker is out. Arkansas has some missing players, and we'll talk about that with Trey Biddy, who covers the Razorbacks for 24/7 Sports. It's a second appearance here in December. But Penn State is really up against it right now, and they're going to need some young players to step up on Saturday.
They're going to need some young players. They're going to need some veterans. They're going to be some guys that we might see in other positions. You reported on earlier on Thursday, Daquan Hardy taking snaps at safety, just because safety has changed so much. I mean, even with Brisker, we expected Brisker not to be there, but you lose Jonathan Sutherland to linebacker, and then all of a sudden you're looking at Jair Brown, Keaton Ellis, and Jalen Reed, and you can get by with 3, no doubt, but you're going to have to find something to supplement there. But because you're on thin ice at a couple of positions, especially in the back 7 of that defense. So there's a lot of guys that you're going to have to lean on. There's going to be freshmen. I don't want to say freshman mistakes or freshman moments and things like that. You look at Olu Fashanu at left tackle. He's going to get the start, as James Franklin confirmed on Wednesday. So there's just a lot of spots around that on both sides of the ball where you're going to see some guys that you weren't expecting to see. I think that's the exciting part about this. I mean, we can talk all day about how much bowls mean, or we could talk about the opt-outs and things like that, but let's not waste everyone's time, yours and I's included. So we're excited to see guys like Olu Fashanu, maybe some of those freshmen, Kobe King, who's on the edge of burning his red shirt. It sure sounds like, from talking to James Franklin, they are going to move ahead and burn his red shirt. Jamari Budden could be in that mix as well. You look at all over this roster, and there's opportunity there, and that's the thing. I think Franklin would probably pull out that opportunity is nowhere graphic, and opportunity is now here for some people. And it's a few more people than we thought it would be, but I think that's kind of what makes it exciting.
And there is an element to this where, hey, if you're with the team now, for a lot of these guys, you're with the team, or you're all in for next spring semester. And it's all about crossing that bridge, building toward it, getting beyond 7-5 this season. And look, there's going to be guys on that practice field that won't be around next year, but plenty of them, some of the 6th-year guys, Sean Clifford, Jonathan Sutherland, there's some had decisions to make, notably Jesse Luketa, but there's a lot of 1st, 2nd, 3rd-year players where this feels like more so the start of spring practice than the end of the 2021 season. Of course, there's a few months before the actual spring practice, but Olu Fashanu is a primary example because they are on thin ice at tackle. They need Olu Fashanu to be a component there. And if Rasheed Walker is back at left tackle as a 4th-year starter in 2022, that solves some of your issues. But we've talked about it. At right tackle, is Caden Wallace a guard? Mike Yursich was asked about that on Thursday morning and strikingly said that thought had not entered his brain because they need him at tackle. And he makes a good point. They do need tackles right now, but I don't think that but yeah, but I think you wonder right now, or Olu Fashanu, can he answer the bell? Because James Franklin said that he was in line to start. And I think if you read between the lines there and look at the timeline, probably for that Rutgers matchup where Penn State was without 20-plus players, including Rasheed Walker, Caden Wallace gave it a go. He ended up being sidelined by the 2nd quarter. So it sounds like Olu Fashanu was in line to start in that game 11. But as we reported that week, he was not on the practice field. We didn't see him. He was banged up. He's healthy now, and I can tell you from watching some practice reps, he's taking some lumps, but he's winning some battles too. but there is not much in terms of depth. They were loading up Olu Fashanu. I think he's their first team and second team left tackle on the practice field right now. And I thought it was interesting looking through the depth chart that you put up, the projected depth chart for Penn State, which was a whale of a task that you took on. There's a lot of guys that you see as first teamers in one spot, second teamers in another spot, second teamers all over the place. I'm pretty sure you have Landon Tengwall as the next man up in 3 spots on the offensive line.
I really should have put him in all 5, to be honest with you. Yeah, but I mean, that's where you're kind of at right now, relying on a true freshman as one of your key backups, a guy, who can benefit from those reps, no doubt. But at the end of the day, it's not a great spot to be in. And, but as we said on the last episode, just get as many tackles ready for 2022 as you can. If you can get Olu Fashanu to be a starter for next year, gives you a ton of options. Of course, Penn State's still looking at the portal for options at offensive tackle and also in the interior as well. I mean, Hunter Norzad's a guy that we've talked about before from Cornell that's a tackle at that level. That's probably going to be an interior guy, but they just need pieces that can play. Let's be honest, we all saw the offensive line this year. So, but yeah, you want to get those guys, and growing pains will be a part of this bowl experience. And I think everybody's going to have to accept that. But it's really tough to forecast what this offensive line is going to do on Saturday, just because lack of experience, and even the guys that have been around for a while, lack of performance at times. So that'll be fun to watch, man. And I say that with a little bit of a frog in my throat, because it's going to be tough to watch at times, but you got to go into this with the optimist opportunity here, the optimist viewpoint, where you're going to get to see the future. The future will look better than they look on Saturday, no doubt. But at the same time, experience matters. And it's one thing when you look back in a couple of years and maybe they've taken that leap that we all thought that they, have been able to take the last couple of years, just hasn't happened. That's the way you got to go into it this weekend.
I mean, there's a potential for a galvanizing situation to come out of this. There's also potential for it to spiral out of control early on in this matchup. I think the offensive line, clearly you're looking for a bounce back effort after a rough regular season from this ground game. Kevon Lee, Juice Scruggs, Noah Kane, guys we've heard from lately saying all the right things, motivated. Kevon Lee says he's taking it personally, that 100-yard absence for any running back for Penn State this year. He wants to go out and get that against Arkansas. But, I know people are fired up about Landon Tengwall getting some reps inside at guard. But the tackle is an issue right now, and you're an injury away from being in a real predicament, because we haven't seen Bryce Effner at practice down here. We know he's been kind of a guy you can plug inside or outside, and Penn State's leaned on him as a backup. They haven't really gone too far down the depth chart on the offensive line this year. So defensively, though, Sean, that is where you just kind of pick apart holes. And let's look at linebacker right now. With Ellis Brooks and Brandon Smith out of the equation, you're getting Jesse Luketa back to the mic. That's a role we saw him start at against Ball State earlier this year when Ellis Brooks missed the first half because of a targeting call against Wisconsin. And then you're seeing Jonathan Sutherland step up at the Sam linebacker position, which is where he started against Rutgers when Curtis Jacobs was among those impacted by the flu. So this is the second time in 3 games that Jonathan Sutherland will be the starting linebacker at Sam. And according to James Franklin, that is where he's going to stay. Not necessarily in the starting lineup for 2022, but he's going to compete for that job at Sam full on in 2022. James Franklin confirming that during his Wednesday press conference.
Yeah, and that's the way to go. I mean, you've got more safeties coming in. I know the safety depth chart for the Outback Bowl looks pretty bleak, at least when I was filling it out and throwing in Sebastian Costantini and Jaden Sider. And no disrespect to those guys, but that's a long way down there. So I think it's okay moving forward at safety. You can go without Sutherland. And as we've talked about Sutherland before, he's been a guy there. He hasn't been a game changer there or anything like that. I'll be interested to see, as you mentioned with linebacker, how they work around the other things. I mean, Jesse Luketa, who we're expecting to start at Mike, has been very effective, more effective as a defensive end. So do you have Kobe King? Do you have Tyler Elson that can fill in there? And Curtis Jacobs, I mean, we kind of take for granted, just the way that he played this year was excellent. He'll move into the box. What does he look like playing that will linebacker spot? And how does that impact what his future plans are? Because I think the world of Curtis Jacobs, as you know, but putting him in the box, he's a little bit smaller, quote unquote. He's almost 230 pounds, but he looks smaller than those other guys out there. So very curious to see what they do in that back seven, because corner seems fine, but other than that, they got a lot of work to do on that back seven in terms of finding out who can play. And Arkansas is not going to let them off the hook, because they're going to run straight at them 245-pound quarterback, a really good running game, one of the best running games in the SEC. So that defense, as good as it was all year, is going to look very different. And the results, I'm expecting Penn State's going to have to muscle up, maybe play some Amin Vanover at defensive end, maybe try to be prepared. And I know it's kind of taboo to mention this, but try to be prepared for a similar attack to what we saw in the Illinois game, because we've been trying to put that one out of our mind for a couple of months now, because Arkansas is going to want to run the ball. Penn State's going to have to muscle up and stop them.
And Arkansas is without Treylon Burks, who 45 more catches than anyone else on the roster. So, yeah, they're going to want to run the football. They're going to do it with their quarterback. They're going to do it with an assemblage of running backs. And Nick Tarburn acknowledged that it's a man-up kind of game for this defense. He says he's enthusiastic to see what the younger players do, guys who are getting opportunities to play, guys who, quite frankly, have been saying they should be playing more, thinking they should be playing more. Now's that chance against the number 21 team in the AP poll. And look, Arkansas right now, they're not necessarily at full strength, but there's a good point that some people are making here is, how much do you want to be there? And that's every bowl. You turn on the TV night by night, and you can kind of see, okay, maybe they weren't locked in for the last month or the last couple of weeks before the bowl game. The energy seems good on the practice field. Like I said, I feel like the guys who are with this team right now are locked in with this team. But let's be honest, the guys who aren't with this team are pretty damn good.
Yeah, that's a huge chunk of your defense. And I'll be interested to see if Penn State changes anything. I know Poindexter's calling the defense now, but do you run a 5-man front against this? Do you bring in, you got a bunch of defensive tackles. Do you bring in a Mulber or a Vanover or something like that to give you some extra beef up front? And that's kind of the other funny thing is you look at what Arkansas does so well, and that's run the football, and they're missing their biggest passing attack. Does that take Daquan Hardy out of the game? And does that take your nickel set, which, at times has been your base set this year? What do you do with him? Do you just move him to safety? I mean, you've got options. They're not ideal options, but you've got options to try and change up your defense and figure out different ways to stop the run. Because I think Arkansas is probably going to run the ball 70% of time, and obviously game flow will determine how things work with that. But at the same time, you've got to avoid that Illinois game at all costs, and keep Arkansas. If you do give up big runs, keep Arkansas out of the end zone and make them settle for field goals.
And as you mentioned with Hardy a little bit earlier, I did confirm after seeing him work on the practice field with Anthony Poindexter and the safeties, that is something that has surfaced here in the postseason of late. And quite frankly, we could see him very early in the matchup at the safety position. He's done an outstanding job as a nickelback this year, but Daquan Hardy maybe used I don't know if that's something that carries over to 2022, but in this moment, it's what they need. And apparently the staff thinks he could be a fit there. That's why we're seeing him get run with the safeties on the practice field. And in terms of guys who are going to get run, I mean, remember the Wisconsin matchup in week 1 and how few names were on the participation report? I think this is going to be rotation city in a lot of different positions, and that includes linebacker. We talked about the starting trio: Curtis Jacobs, Jesse Luketa, Jonathan Sutherland. For one, Jonathan Sutherland, this is his second start at the position, and I think you want to get a look at some other guys. This is a big opportunity to get film on guys and get them experience. And then Jesse Luketa, we just mentioned it. Arnold Ebiketie is out of the equation. He's your top edge rusher. Jesse Luketa had a lot of success, not necessarily in the sack department, but just being a disruptive presence off the edge and the kind of presence you want in a matchup like this against Arkansas. Anthony Poindexter saying they've got to kind of balance it out and figure out how much do they want to use Jesse at the Mike linebacker, how much do they want to use him at defensive end, while also factoring in it's going to be 80 degrees, a little bit different than what you're normally used to playing. And so I think that means Kobe King, maybe Jamari Budden, like you said. Franklin said red shirts will be burned essentially. Those are the only two guys. This is no mystery. When he says, hey, we're going to have to probably burn some red shirts on Saturday, there's only two guys who could possibly be talking about. Jamari Budden's at 4 games. Kobe King is at 4 games. We haven't even seen Kobe King play since the Indiana matchup, Sean. He played in 4 of the first 5 games. He's been on the shelf since then. Certainly they wanted to redshirt him, but opt-outs happened. Other things happened. Jamari Budden had to step up and play in the Rutgers game, so that was the 4th game for him. What other guys having the flu. Whether you like it or not, it looks like both of these guys, I think, are going to be sophomores rather than redshirt freshmen, and that's just Penn State making the adjustments they need. And I think what we hear about Kobe King around the program right now in the postseason really, really I'm really excited to see what he does on Saturday, but more so I'm excited to see what he looks like coming out of the end of spring practice next year, because it sounds like he is turning in some heads.
I'd agree with that. I think you play him and you kind of say that begrudgingly because, you would like to save that extra year for him. But, in today's college football, does that extra year, come around all that often? So it's a good question there. With Kobe King, put him in the middle. He's played Will, he's played Mike, smart kid, just a guy that has really impressed people, probably more physically impressive than they thought he would be, more athletic than they thought he would be. So I'm excited to see what he can bring to the table. And because you do that, you give yourself a chance to have a pass rush. I mean, you look at what Penn State has at defensive end right now. You're losing your pass rusher in Arnold Ebiketie, but you've got Nick Tarburton and Smith Vilbert there on the edge. Those guys aren't pass rushers. I mean, those guys are not going to be guys that get to the quarterback on third down. Maybe Zariah Fisher is that guy. But right now, you're kind of seeing their approach to the portal is to find a guy that can get to the quarterback, not necessarily find a guy that can be another Tarburton, that can be another Smith Vilbert. So I think that's kind of what you're seeing there. And you're looking at Lucetta as a potential answer there, which he kind of has to be. If anybody's going to get after the quarterback, it either has to come from second level pressure or Jesse Lucetta off the edge.
I get the feeling that this defense at its best on Saturday would be Kobe King at middle linebacker. If he's ready for it, we don't know what the staff knows, but if he's at middle linebacker and playing quality football and Jesse Lucetta can play defensive end, to me, that gives you probably your best mix in the front seven. Just because right now, like you said, defensive end, it's a little scary. Smith Vilbert is being touted as a guy who could break out in this Outback Bowl. He's in year 3 on campus. That's something that we're going to need to see for ourselves transpire on the field against Arkansas. But in terms of guys getting after the quarterback, I'm going to circle Curtis Jacobs' name in this matchup, maybe as a blitzer. He seems like the guy in the front seven that could disrupt the pocket, could force some things with KJ Jefferson, and maybe match up with him from a physicality and athletic standpoint, because this quarterback creates a lot of problems for Penn State with his legs, just as he does with his arm.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to kind of be like what you would expect playing against Will Levis. I mean, this is a big guy, can move the line. If he's a runner, can throw the ball a mile like Levis. I mean, I don't know if he's the most accurate guy out there either, and he doesn't have Traylon Burks, his number one target. So that's going to play into how much they probably throw the ball, how much they throw the ball down the field. This, to me, is a game that's going to be played closer to the line of scrimmage on both sides, especially without those top two wideouts. So you've got an opportunity to put a bunch of guys in the box and try and slow it down. And I think that's probably the game plan on both sides. You mentioned the running game for Penn State a little bit earlier, how they've taken that personally. I mean, you can take that personally all you want, but you just haven't produced, and they haven't been as good as they need them to be. So will that improvement come tomorrow or come on Saturday? Excuse me. I don't know. I mean, we haven't seen enough to give them the benefit of the doubt that it's going to break out. So they said they want to inject some juice in the run game. They're going to need it. I don't know where it's going to come from or how it's going to happen, but they're going to need to splash some runs in there and keep moving the chains.
Yeah, it's looking like Kevon Lee, Noah Kane, no surprise there, but the two lead backs for Penn State going into this matchup. And Sean, when we look at some of the younger guys we're hearing about, someone's got to replace Jahan Dotson. Well, not replace him, but they got to find ways to create big plays, the kind that are now not available for Jahan Dotson now that he's focused on the NFL. So Malik Mega seems as good a shot of anybody to take the ball the distance at any moment in the game on one single touch. And you watch him on the practice field. We've said this about a few guys in the past, and they didn't ultimately pan out always, but he's about as good looking of a player as a prospect as you'll see in this entire practice field for Penn State right now. And the fact that it's only his second year on campus speaks volumes about where he could be this time next year. But right now, he's someone that teammates, coaches are talking about. This could be a setting for him to really serve as a springboard for 2022, assert himself. I don't know if he starts this game, Sean, and that's something I should probably say up front. You're going to see starters in this game that might make you scratch your head, might make you want to pull your hair out and say, why is this guy getting reps? We should be feeding them to the younger players. Keep in mind that the starter doesn't necessarily translate to the most snaps in the game. I think Eric Wilson at left guard is one of those situations, maybe Cam Sullivan-Brown at wide receiver. But I think regardless, Mega will get some run. And, man, this is a great opportunity to see what he's about.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn in terms of how much we see a third receiver just based on what they have with Brenton Strange and Theo Johnson, and even Tyler Warren. You could throw him in there. So I expect a bunch of tight end, two receivers, two tight end sets, not necessarily in the traditional form where you've got two tight ends flanked on the end of the line with their hands in the dirt. But, you can move those guys around and create mismatches. But, yeah, I agree with you. I think Mega presents some upside that Sullivan Brown doesn't. I think probably – judging with snaps. I mean, I don't know that you have to have Mega out there all the time, but if you get him out there, a certain number of snaps, you can have him be more effective than if he was out there for 60 plays or something like that. So I agree with you. I still don't think it's his time per se, but you've got an opportunity to get him going for 2022, and that's always kind of what's been circled with him. Came in as a raw prospect, a really good athlete, had guys in front of him that were obviously more ready to play. And that's the funny part here. We're talking about young guys. Malik Mega, he's the same class as Parker Washington, who's a 2-year starter for Penn State.
And Keandre Lambert-Smith,
yeah, and Keandre Lambert-Smith as well. So you've got a couple of different expectation levels there. As we've talked about that all the time on the podcast, the expectation level versus the actual reality, those have come to fruition at wideout. So interested to see that. I'm also interested to see how Arkansas plays Penn State, because as we've seen throughout the season, you play 2 deep safeties, you take away that deep ball, you make Penn State do things in front of you, and that's where they have issues. So I expect them to do that as well. So that's where I see a guy like Washington, a guy like Keandre Lambert-Smith playing those underneath routes that we saw that Michigan was so successful with this year, those drag routes and things of that nature. I think that's where Penn State can maybe slip into the secondary and get those big plays. I don't know if it's going over top of the defense that's going to be the big play for Penn State, but if you're able to break those guys free and give them a little bit of room to run in the secondary, they can break some tackles and maybe make some big plays. And that's what Penn State's going to need. It's going to need big plays this weekend.
Arkansas head coach Sam Pittman acknowledged that he views the Penn State tight ends as a threat, as a challenge, dealing with them. They've been a bit hit or miss game to game this season, but a good opportunity here. As you said, feels like we're going to see a lot of all 3 of these tight ends, a lot of 2 tight end packages. And this is the kind of talent and this is the kind of setting without Jahan Dotson, where Sean Clifford's going to need some new safety nets. Maybe he discovers one of those guys in a Brenton Strange, a Theo Johnson, Tyler Warren made some late movement. I really like where he's coming along. But Sean, I think when you look overall, Parker Washington, it's his debut as target number 1. I mean, this is the next step in his career. He's done everything you've asked of him to do. He has been that wide receiver 2 that Penn State has desperately lacked in recent years. When KJ Hamler was wide receiver 1, of course, they had Pat Fryermuth then, but it has been a really nice balance in the wide receiver room. Jahan Dotson's gone now. I really want to see how Parker Washington responds to this moment, because he's going to be counted on in a big way. And I mean, James Franklin and Taylor Stubblefield, they've sung the praises of this guy, where his career could go. And this is, kind of a pivot moment in his career now with Jahan Dotson out of the picture.
It was funny. We had him at Bowl Media Day a couple of weeks ago, and obviously was expecting Jahan to opt out. So I'm pushing questions in his direction. Jahan obviously had not done that publicly yet, but kind of looking down and scratching, just kind of he knew he was going to be the top option, but he wanted to talk around it. So I'm curious to see how he handles himself as the number 1. Big Parker Washington fan, as you know, but he's going to have a big opportunity to take that next step and establish himself. And as we've seen in the last couple of years, there's a lot to be there. There's a lot there for the taking as a receiver, as a guy that can step up and be in that role that Dotson's been in the last 2 years, in that role that Hamler was in a couple of years ago. That's a pretty big spotlight right there. I think he's talented enough to be in it, but again, he's got to take another step. Keandre Lambert-Smith has to take another step, and everybody around him, I mean, Clifford included, needs to be on that train as well. So I'm very curious to see what happens, because if this is a team that can't establish a consistent passing game, that's one where they fall behind, and the big plays might be few and far between because of it. So I'm very curious to see how this passing game clicks. How Clifford handles himself. I'm hopeful that he is as healthy as he's been since pre-Iowa game. But yeah, they're gonna have to find somebody to step up and be that number 1 guy. I think Parker Washington will be that number 1 guy. Will it happen on Saturday? It's still very much up in the air.
Yeah, Clifford, I think the second half of the season, cumulatively over the final 6 games, was in negatives for rushing yards, whereas the first half of that game, he was getting 30, 40-yard games as a runner. Can he be that guy against Arkansas? Has he had the opportunity to heal up and utilize those legs, not necessarily as a runner, but evading pressure, creating more opportunities downfield, a little improvisation? Feels like that was missing from the toolkit a bit down the stretch for Penn State. Speaking of wide receivers, though, coming soon to State College.
And before you move on, what did James Franklin say about Jefferson this week? They don't have a game next week, or they don't have a game anytime soon.
Right.
So he doesn't have to be healthy. And I know that's kind of a cynical way to say it, but You could say the same about Sean Clifford. I mean, if you need him to run, you're more apt to do it when there's nothing on the schedule for the next couple of months.
All right, let me try that again. Coming soon to State College and to the wide receiver room, Caden Saunders, you were in Orlando for a reason. Part of it was to see Mr. Saunders in action at the Under Armour All-America practice field. Drew Shelton is there, incoming offensive tackle. Katron Allen is on the roster, a running back coming to Penn State in a matter of weeks as well. I saw the video you posted of a really impressive one-handed snag that Caden Saunders put up there. It doesn't sound like he was able to finish the night, but tell us what you're seeing in Orlando and what you're hearing about these Penn State, not just commits anymore, I should say signees.
Yeah, signees. It's changed the game in terms of what we see with availability and everything like that at the Under Armour game, because all these guys, or most of these guys, are signed. I know Brian Doan, I'm sitting in his hotel room right now doing this podcast, has been chasing down some of the uncommitted guys, and it used to be 50 or 60 of these guys, and now all of a sudden all these guys are signed, and what are you going to do? So that's a whole nother story. But I'm here to see 3 Penn State commits, and unfortunately for practice this morning, 2 of them not dressed with injuries. I don't think we're going to see Caden Saunders in this game. Katron Allen probably still up in the air. He's been nursing a knee thing. Caden Saunders aggravated his hamstring. I will say, before he did that, he looked awesome. I mean, just out here running out of the slot, making guys miss. That one-handed catch was one thing, but I missed the first rep where he ran a smash fade and just left the guy in the dust, made a great smooth catch. Short area quickness is very good. Speed is obviously very good. He just brings something a little bit different to the table, and he's going to draw those KJ Hamler comparisons. I was talking to Chris, was it Henderson, from 24/7 Sports, who is down here, absolutely loves the kid, just in terms of his ability to start and stop is elite compared to some of the other guys in this class. So very curious to see how that transitions when he gets to Penn State in a couple of weeks. But unfortunately, we're not going to see that down here in Orlando for Under Armour. The third guy that's out here, Drew Shelton, the offensive lineman. First time I've seen Drew in a while in person. Looks great, 275 pounds, one of the better builds here. They've got him playing guard and a little bit of center with one-on-ones. He's more than held his own. Don't know that he's going to start the game on Saturday. And also, last night was a non-padded practice, so there really wasn't anything you could take away from the offensive line portion of that. But he seems to be holding his own, seems to be doing well. It's just unfortunate with this, with the way that they've run this. There's a lot of guys that are banged up and a lot of guys that probably won't play at practice and in the game or something like that. And unfortunately, today, two of those guys were Penn State commits.
Before you get bombarded with comments about that comment you just made, Drew Shelton playing guard and center for a team that is starving for tackles, his outlook in Penn State is
tackle. He'll play tackle.
Okay, let's just address that real fast.
Could be a swing guy, but I mean,
Sure.
Given what's on the roster, given where he's at, I expect to see him at tackle.
All right, good stuff from Sean. You can follow his coverage out of Orlando on Lions247.com. A bunch going on down there in the 24/7 Sports recruiting team, including Brian Doan on the site. Sean, we had a chance to catch up with Trey Biddy just a moment ago. We're going to get to that interview right now. Here's Trey Biddy, who's down in Tampa covering the Arkansas Razorbacks for 24/7 Sports. We bring back on Trey Biddy. You heard from him just a few weeks ago here in the Lions 24/7 podcast, a couple days after this bowl matchup was announced. And if you hadn't noticed, December has changed the complexion of this game in a lot of ways. We have fixated on Penn State's opt-outs and who's not available for them, but there is certainly some adjustment being made over on Arkansas' side. Trey, give us the lowdown on who Arkansas has lost in December, and we'll start there.
Well, it hasn't been anything like Penn State, obviously. Last time we talked, I was saying that I didn't expect Traylon Burks to opt out of the bowl game. But, I think the more he looked at it, being a first-round draft pick and stuff and talking to agents, I'm sure, decided to opt out of the game. And I think that's a bigger loss for Arkansas than it is Dotson for Penn State, because Penn State, you look at their, they've got guys with 57 catches and stuff like that. And they've got guys that have stepped up and been there for them, some promising young players and stuff. Arkansas hasn't had a consistent playmaker like that. Maybe Warren Thompson would be the closest guy that could fill in there. So I do think that's a bigger loss on the offensive side of the ball for Arkansas than it is for Penn State, even though Dotson's a fantastic player. I just think they have more that can make up. Now, defensively, it's a different story. Since we talked last, Arkansas has lost Trey Williams. He was arrested for suspicion of DWI and announced an opt-out. He would have been suspended for the game anyway with the arrest. But he's a big loss, too. He leaves Arkansas with 6 sacks over at the right end spot. They do have a good number of defensive ends that they can kind of rotate in there who have had some success this season. So they should be okay there. And aside from that, that's really it. Talking to a lot of the players and stuff, there's definitely a sense, and that's kind of been a narrative. It feels like all college football season, the team that wants to be there and the team that doesn't want to be there. The thing is, sometimes you don't really know until you get there, but certainly looks like from, an indication of having 5 defensive players for Penn State opt out of this bowl game, especially right up the middle, defensive tackle, linebacker, safety, right up the middle of that defense. That's got to be a scary proposition. Although, you guys know as well as I do, when you look at Penn State from 2017 to now, usually recruiting classes rank somewhere between about 6th and 16th nationally. So, they've recruited well. But Arkansas obviously has a lot of players coming back, and they could have had several players that opt out. Monteric Brown at cornerback is a guy that's going to get drafted if he just chooses to come out, which I think he will. John Ridgeway at nose tackle is another guy that's going to get drafted who probably could have opted out. Bumper Pool at middle linebacker. And then you've got other players. Grant Morgan has a chance to get drafted. Hayden Henry playing his last game at linebacker. Joe Fouché is another guy playing his last game. So there's like 7 guys on defense for Arkansas that are possibly playing their last game that have decided to stick around and play. So not as big of an opt-out scene for Arkansas.
So Burks is opting out. That doesn't kill the passing game, but it takes away a big part of the passing game, as you said. But yeah. Sam Pittman's got to be happy that he's going to get to run the ball on Saturday. I mean, how do you see that with everything that Penn State's losing? How do you see that changing Arkansas's approach with just with everything going on? Do you expect them to run the ball 70% of the time or so on Saturday?
I could definitely see it happening. I mean, when you talk about, what I just mentioned with right up the middle of Penn State's defense, having players opt out, and Arkansas likes to run the ball. I mean, they're one of the best running teams in the country. And I thought James Franklin at the joint press conference on Wednesday made a really good point about KJ Jefferson, who goes about 245 pounds at quarterback for Arkansas, is a really good runner. And, there's not a game after this one, so it's open it up and let him go. There's no like protecting him, keeping him healthy for next week, which is kind of interesting when you look at Arkansas's game against Ole Miss, where they really unleashed him. And he was kind of banged up the next week for the Auburn game, and they kind of struggled against Auburn the following week. But there's no Auburn game after this one. There's no opponent. So you can run Penn State against Penn State up the middle over and over again with KJ Jefferson. I think that's what they'll do. They got a 245-pound quarterback, 235-pound running back, and Dominic Johnson also, who's a real bull. And both of those guys have not been 100% all season. KJ's been dealing with a knee injury since the Georgia game that slowed him down a little bit. Dominic Johnson also had a bit of a knee injury right when he started taking over as a starting running back. And they've got other guys, Rocket Sanders, another guy who's a freshman, 6'2", 225, who has a lot of speed, obviously named Rocket for a reason, but has a lot of speed. Traylon Smith, who's a senior back, a smaller guy who can kind of come in and mix it up. And AJ Green is another one. So they've got a stable of running backs that they can throw at Penn State. And, they will run the ball 40-something times a game. I would expect that to remain the same. And we'll see what they do, because you're going to have – Penn State's too talented. Even with the opt-outs, you're going to have to keep them honest. So it would be big for Arkansas if they could maybe hit a big play, maybe take the top off. Warren Thompson, for all the wide receivers, that could fill in for Burks, he's probably the guy that's capable of taking the top off of the defense. So look for Arkansas maybe to try to throw one deep early and see if they can make those safeties stop trying to cheat up on them.
During the regular season, Burks had 45 more catches than anyone else on this roster for Arkansas. Does it feel like this game is more so than ever in the hands of KJ Jefferson? By the way, Anthony Poindexter, the interim defensive coordinator for Penn State this week, saying Jefferson can throw the ball a mile and then turn into a power back. Yeah,
Jefferson's really done a good job at throwing the deep ball this season. In fact, probably his best pass is the deep ball. And I think part of that is based on the fact that teams are afraid of him running the ball. So it has opened up that aspect for him. But I really think that Arkansas will probably look to KJ Jefferson and say, hey, go win this game for us. Go win it with your legs. Go win it with your arm. And you're right about that. Again, with Burks, it's a pretty significant drop off. There's some guys with, Tyson Morris is a super senior. Devion Warren is a super senior. Both those guys start for Arkansas. Warren Thompson he's a junior. He's a transfer from Florida State, but he's an older player. So they have some guys with some experience like that. And another guy to watch out for, actually a couple of guys, Blake Kern in the passing game at tight end has been good for them in terms of like a possession type of receiver. Trey Knox is a guy that played wide receiver for them. It's about 225 now. His goal is to get up to about 250 next year. But for right now, he's kind of a wide receiver / tight end, moves inside and outside. But he's made some big catches for him made some big catches for them down the stretch also this season. But absolutely, to your point, I can absolutely see them say, hey, KJ, win it with your legs, win it with your arm. Just go out and do whatever you have to do to win this game.
Defensively, obviously, Arkansas not hit as hard by the opt-outs. What do you do if you're Penn State here? Where do you attack to find a soft spot in that Razorback defense?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you throw the ball, just what Penn State has done all year. And Arkansas has been pretty good against the pass all season, but they do have some weaknesses, no question about it. I think they're pretty strong at safety. Monteric Brown is an NFL cornerback. They're really strong at linebacker. They have a trio of senior linebackers that have just been kind of the heartbeat of this team on defense. I like them up front on the defensive line, but there's a couple of spots here, here and there where you can beat Arkansas. The nickel play has been, hit and miss kind of. The other cornerback spot with Hudson Clark and Ladarius Bishop has kind of been definitely the weak point for them on the defensive side of the ball. They don't bring a lot of pressure. Usually you're going to see, and I would fully expect in this one also to see more of a 3-2-6 look for Arkansas's defense. So there's not really like a true edge guy to come after the quarterback. You look at the stats, Arkansas doesn't produce a whole lot of sacks. They do a good job, however, of getting tackles for loss. But it just shows you they don't get to the quarterback a whole lot, and they're without Trey Williams. So, it's not so much that Arkansas doesn't have good defensive backs. It's that sometimes the quarterback just has a lot of time, and you really can't cover anybody for more than 4 seconds.
The balance when Arkansas has been at its best on offense has really shown through in 2021, some of their finer moments. But let's say that Penn State, with their defensive secondary, certainly looking like the bright spot right now after some of these opt-outs, even with Jaquan Brisker out of the mix, if they're able to have success against the Arkansas aerial attack, and that sustains early in the game, can Arkansas get it done, get a win by leaning heavily on the ground, or do you think it needs to strike a balance?
Well, balance might be a tricky word. I think that they need to make sure that Penn State trusts them to be able to throw the ball and to be able to beat them that way. And, kind of like I talked, maybe taking the top off the defense. But, if Arkansas can get things going with the ground game, and if KJ Jefferson has some success, especially early run in the game, Penn State's not going to have any choice but to creep up and try to stop that. And when they do that, that's obviously, the old saying goes, that's when you beat them over the top. So it's going to be a balance in terms of making sure that they know you can do either one if you need to, but Arkansas is still going to want to run the ball.
Where do the big plays come from? I think we're probably both going to ask this question, covering Penn State, covering Arkansas this week. But you think about this game and you think about how that script is probably how we think it's going to play out. A lot of running the ball, running the clock, and things like that. It's going to be a couple of big plays that might swing this thing. Where do they come from on the Arkansas side?
Well, Arkansas will throw some trick plays out every once in a while. I mean, they on special teams, they've had a couple of successful fake field goals that they've tried. One of them went for a touchdown. One was a big first down. They've done some throwback passes and things of that nature. But, again, I think it goes back to KJ Jefferson. He is capable. Like, we hear a lot of things about quarterbacks being a dual threat quarterback and stuff. And a lot of times that just means the guy can buy time with his feet. KJ is a legitimate threat, not only to run past you at 245 pounds, but also will plow over you. I can remember back to the Texas game, and Sam Pittman said this, but he ran right at the Texas safety. He was, deep into the third level of the defense and ran right at the Texas safety just to show him that this was all day. This was coming at you all day, because he's a load to bring down. And, and again, sometimes you think he's about to plow over you and he can make a little move and cut up the middle. And again, he's not been 100% with his knee for some time now. And the KJ we saw earlier in the year felt like he broke off a few more big runs. So that could be probably where Arkansas looks to get more big plays. I mean, it really feels like the way it's shaping up, that this is going to be a big game for KJ Jefferson if Arkansas is going to win.
My last one for you here, Trey. We heard from Sam Pittman, and he made a good point. If you're looking for the Arkansas and Penn States that finish the regular season, you're not going to find them in Tampa. These are two different teams. I'll tell you what, we have our predictions coming up for the game here on the podcast. I'm still trying to figure out where I'm going to land. How do you see this one playing out as we're now less than 48 hours away from getting into Raymond James Stadium and seeing this transpire?
Yeah, well, I mean, I just have to look at things on the surface right now, and it kind of goes along with just the narrative that we see with college football. Does Penn State really want to be here? Are they, who's more different from what they've, put together, and, the cohesion and everything that they built throughout the season. Who's more different? And to me, it's Arkansas is more consistent, and Penn State's a lot more different. With whatever, everything that's going on with the defensive side of the ball. So I do think it's going to be a close game, but I'm going to give the edge to Arkansas on this one.
All right, Trey, we appreciate it. See you in the press box at Raymond James Stadium. Enjoy Tampa. We'll be seeing you around.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks again to Trey for his time. We'll see what transpires on Saturday. I mean, it is so tough. We'll have our predictions here in a second. He's leaning Razorbacks, and I can't blame him. I mean, it's hard to go all in on picking Penn State right now when we have so many questions about the holes they need to fill and who actually is going to step up and fill those holes. You have to have a very optimistic viewpoint that everything's going to fall into place, that Penn State can able to come up with answers on the offensive line from a playmaking perspective on offense. And then, of course, stopping this Arkansas rush attack, number 3 in the SEC, a quarterback who can get it done. And I'm just not really ready to get there with Penn State. I flew down here thinking I might end up picking Penn State. I'm going to go with Arkansas. I'm seeing something like 27-24. This one could just get out of hand for if Penn State is not mentally up to the task. But I should say, we haven't been covering Arkansas. I mean, I know Trey has. I don't know what the vibe is with their team. I don't know how ready they are to get into this game and face this Penn State team and the the toolkit that Penn State has. They've got this is a team that has recruited well, and that's going to be tested in terms of their depth today on Saturday. But that's where I land right now, Sean. I think Penn State's going to finish 7-6. I do think it'll be a close game. I could see Arkansas jumping out to a 2-possession lead early on, and Penn State trying to dig itself out of a hole, a little reminiscent of what we saw happen at the Citrus Bowl with Kentucky back in 2018 versus Penn State. But again, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Penn State came home with a win. We just have no read on this team because it's not the same team we covered when they played Michigan State on November 27th.
When we covered Penn State all year long, all the questions were on the offensive side of the ball. And now you add defensive questions to the mix. That's a tough one to swallow right there. Arkansas is going to try to run the ball. They probably will be successful running the ball. It's about keeping them out of the end zone. But with Penn State, you take away Jahan Dotson, you take away a big safety blanket for Sean Clifford. You take away your big play guy on the offensive side of the ball. So I have a tough time seeing this one come together. You're going to need big plays. You're going to need splash plays. It has not been there in the running game. You're going to need Parker Washington and Theo Johnson and Brenton Strange to step up, catch a lot of balls. And I have questions about if Penn State gets behind, how apt are they to come back and throw the ball around and get back where they need to be? Because if you stack a couple of 3-and-outs, if you're Penn State, you're going to be in trouble. So I have Arkansas winning 20-10, kind of a hat tip to Tony Davis there. But sorry, Don just saw me make my prediction. But yeah, I'm going to go with that because I think it's a low scoring game. I think it's a lot of clock chewed up with running games and things like that. And, you're going to need a turnover. You're going to need a big play on special teams. And I'm just not sure with all the questions that Penn State has in both facets or in all 3 facets right now, where those are going to come from. So I have Arkansas winning this game as well.
There are various ways this game could be lost. The outcome on the scoreboard could be all over the place, but 20-10 and seeing Sean Clifford and Mike Yursich head home back to State College for year 2 together, coming off of a clunker like that. And I'm assuming if they score 10 points, people aren't going to be thrilled with the way Sean Clifford played. That's an annoyingly large looming cloud over this offense and the QB offensive coordinator conversation. Look, read into it what you will with the bowl game. It's an exhibition. Maybe we shouldn't attach too much of it and apply it to 2022. But, I mean, perception is important on the recruiting trail, and perception is important for people like you and I who sit in front of microphones and talk about it all offseason. So really curious to see what kind of Sean Clifford we get here on Saturday, because if he comes out and he's dialed in and he's moving the ball with his legs and he's getting it downfield, and even without Jahan Dotson for the first time in a long time, he's able to move it through the air, then that says a lot of great things. If he comes out and it's a deer in the headlights, then you go into this offseason, you're saying, how quickly can a guy like Drew or Bo or Christian be ready to take the reins? And we've talked for a long time about Franklin's loyalty with Sean Clifford. Now, for the sake of our conversations here on the podcast and for the sake of Sean Clifford and the questions he's going to receive over the next 3-4 months before spring practice, I personally hope that number 14 goes out and plays a good game. And I think he will. That's why I've got them scoring 24 points. But defensively, I just can't hang my hat on what Penn State was able to accomplish during the regular season, because the all Big Ten players essentially are no longer part of that equation.
Yeah, I mean, taking starters away is one thing when they're all Big Ten guys. That's a tough one to swallow. I will be curious to see if Penn State does go back to running Sean Clifford a little bit more, maybe slowing down the game, getting that clock moving. And I think both teams will probably chew up a bunch of clock tomorrow or on Saturday, excuse me. So I don't know, man. It's just so many questions out there, and I'm going to enjoy the game regardless because then on the optimist side says there are young guys to get a look at here. But it's going to be, let's call it as it is. It's going to be tough for Penn State to come out without 8 starters or 7 or 8 starters and turn this into a quality performance. So maybe we're proven wrong. I hope we are. That definitely would like to see more than 10 points myself, but this could be a game where it's where points are tough to come by.
Penn State 7-5, facing an Arkansas squad. Second time they're playing a top 25 opponent out of the SEC in this season. So again, something to be gained here. Those are things that you can tweet out graphics of after the game. If you can pick up a win here, there's ways to manipulate a bowl victory throughout your off season. But if you come home 7-6, more questions for James Franklin and company. We'll find out how it all goes down, and when the game is over, Sean and I will join you from here in Tampa and talk about everything. Turn the page a little bit. And then we're resetting. It's the offseason. We got the early enrollees coming through, but still the matchup to look ahead to Saturday. Sean, drive safely from Orlando. We'll see you here, I think, tonight. Lance, thanks for doing your part as a producer behind the scenes. And, of course, to our buddy Trey Biddy for hopping on with us once again and giving us an update on Arkansas as they enter this contest. I'm Tyler Donohue. On behalf of everyone here, this is the Lions 24/7 podcast. Thanks for listening.